Whilst Rocksteady pioneered a new age of AAA superhero games with their Arkham trilogy, it's been Marvel games that have capitalised on that since then, that have brought that into a new era. And that's the era that we're ranking today, since Marvel Games became a publishing entity. Ahead of Spider-Man 2's release this week, I wanted to rank the games of this new Marvel era. The criteria here is that we're not ranking mobile games nor Telltale's Guardians of the Galaxy, meaning we have 10 Marvel games to rank. Those 10 games are Marvel's Spider-Man, Spider-Man Miles Morales, Spider-Man 2, Marvel's Avengers, Midnight Suns, Guardians of the Galaxy, Marvel Rivals, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, Iron Man VR, and Ultimate Alliance 3. So let's get stuck into it, but before we do, if comic book games content is what you're after, news, reviews, guides, streams, whatever it might be, make sure you're subscribed, that's what we cover around here. Alright, let's rank these games. At number 10, I'm going with Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. Fighting games have never really been my jam, but what I do love and appreciate is a good cinematic story, especially when it comes to Mortal Kombat, or more particular, the Injustice games from NetherRealm Studios. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite just doesn't have any juice at all, from the art style, the character roster, to just not really feeling how the game plays. Fighting games have never massively clicked with me, and I'm not good at them, truth be told, but the story mode here is so poor. The art direction and overall graphical presentation was a letdown, but a fighting game is also defined by its cast of characters, and Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite provided such an underwhelming one. The base fighting here is fine, but yeah, I don't really have much else to say about this one, we're better just move on. At number 9, I'm going for Iron Man VR, and to be honest with you, I think Camouflage did a really great job here translating Iron Man into VR. It's not at number 9 because it's bad, it's just okay, it's competent. It tells a fairly decent Iron Man story, but in my playthrough, it was just sometimes a bit too much to handle. I finally played this in 2024 on the MetaQuest 3, and from the start you can really see where they focused on when it came to refining their strong suits for the magnificent Batman Arkham Shadow. Iron Man VR has got a pretty great cast. Josh Keaton I enjoyed as Tony Stark. Jennifer Hale's here too. It's just that combat felt at times a little bit janky, but as a VR Iron Man game, I do think it's really well done to even make it functional and fun in the first place. But it just never quite clicked with me, especially in the way that Arkham Shadow is so strong in all of its departments. Iron Man VR has just got too many issues here or there to make this one really stand out. From here on out though, I really like all of these games. So at number 8, we're going for Marvel Ultimate Alliance. Question number 1, when are we going to get this game on other platforms? Question number 2, are we ever going to get another Ultimate Alliance? I've got quite distinct memories of Ultimate Alliance 3 actually, but not from my first playthrough. It's weird, everyone had their COVID game that when lockdown first started, everyone just sunk a ton of hours into it. Weirdly enough, Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 was that game for me. You know, you'd have those games that whilst you were working or you're pretending to work, you just sunk a couple of hours into. I'd played the game at launch in 2019 and then waited for all the DLCs to come out before I gave it another go. And during COVID, I grinded my ass off through all of the rifts to get all the bonus costumes and things like that. Ultimate Alliance 3 is a real love letter to the Marvel Universe. From the vast amount of locations you go to, the character dynamics that affect both gameplay but also dialogue, the vast roster, and all of the cosmetics you could get. I do miss a little bit of that grounded nature from the original Ultimate Alliance game, and also the choices that you had to make in both that one and in 2. It's a shame that this is still locked to the Switch because performance got rough at times, especially when you chain together ultimate abilities. It was also a very grindy game through the rifts and the character levels, which you wouldn't typically have expected. I have a lot of hours on it, but it was fun and very comic coded at its heart. The Fantastic Four and the Doom DLC was a good adventure too, and by the end of all the DLC, it was incredible how stacked the cast of characters was. It was a pretty forgettable story, fair enough, but a memorable adventure, spanning across so many iconic locations, plus seeing Cosmo. I mean, what a good boy. I hope it gets ported, or if a 4 is made, I hope it's multi-platform, because this is really an esteemed Marvel gaming franchise. At number 7, I'm going for Marvel Rivals. I can already feel the hate that is about to come my way. But the thing is, Marvel Rivals is an extremely competent PvP hero shooter, and full transparency, I've always been a PvE over PvP guy, but I think it's just good. People love to dunk on Overwatch and player counts and all that jazz, but even though I would play Marvel Rivals every day of the week over Overwatch, I think Overwatch is still fundamentally better. Better feeling movement, gunplay, more deliberate maps and modes. Marvel Rivals will continue to grow and be a success, and I'm delighted to finally have a successful live service superhero game, but I think it's just very basic at its core. But at the same time, that's all that ever needed to be. I adore the game's art style. I'm really enjoying its attempts to build this story with its lore pages that are presented as comic book panels, the attention to detail in the cosmetics, the value of the battle passes, even if I think those battle passes are way too slow. There's a lot to really like about it that's only going to get better as more heroes are added, but I think its core gameplay, modes and maps are competent, but not much more. As I said, it will grow, but as it does, I hope that it will stop mimicking other entries into this genre and start leveraging and really leaning into its own IP a lot more. Experiment more in its modes than just push the payload and control the zone, and really lean into the Marvel IP and experiment more with that. But I will be no doubt playing this game for the years to come because it's still a great time and it's got so much Marvel juice to it. Now, putting that at number 7 makes my number 6 very controversial, but at number 6 I'm going for Marvel's Avengers by Crystal Dynamics. There's a lot to be said about Avengers. The horrific technical state of the game, not just at launch but throughout its life cycle, the conflicted gear system, the underwhelming live service offerings, and the repetitive activities. I'm with you 100%, but Avengers was still such an impressive game to me. I thought Kamala Khan's story was really endearing. I still remember her quote of "good isn't a thing you are, it's a thing you do." I thought the campaign was very strong. It lacked very memorable boss fights, sure, but that final section when it all came together was fantastic. Of course, the live service elements weren't great, but that feeling of loading in with your friends as a 4-stack for the first time is unforgettable, genuinely. I remember being Iron Man and being penned in as all these aimbots came towards me and watching Mjolnir just fly across my face and clean sweep the aimbots out of me, or watching Cap bounce in the shield in between them all. Genuinely unforgettable moments that really cinematic stuff you just couldn't get elsewhere. Especially when you think about how this came a year after Endgame, it was a lot of fun to play as these iconic characters, especially with your friends. You can pick multiple parts of Marvel's Avengers apart. The weird realistic art direction, the loot, the activities, but I think it's difficult to argue just how great each character's combat kit felt. Thor really did feel like this thunder god, Iron Man being able to specialise into lasers or rockets, and when you did get a good build, melting aimbots felt really great. That when you got that build and it was singing, and you were able to melt the Super Adaptoid, one of the worst fucking enemies in video games period, it was so satisfying. If I could have chose one of the live service superhero games between this, Suicide Squad and Marvel Rivals to be successful in this timeline, it would have been Avengers. But it wasn't to be. And if you want to feel old, this year marks 5 years since its release. So keep an eye out for a retrospective later this year. Halfway through then, and at number 5, I'm going for Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. Look, I distinctly remember a PlayStation showcase where we got Knights of the Old Republic, but more importantly, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, Marvel's Spider-Man 2, and Marvel's Wolverine were all shown at this showcase. And I just remember being so excited by Wolverine and Spider-Man, and Guardians came up, and I almost turned my nose up on it. I was really snobby. I'm never really like that. I just remember being really dismissive of it, but every time we got a look at that game, it never did a great job of enticing me into it. But boy was I wrong. I was so wrong. Guardians of the Galaxy by Eidos Montreal is fantastic. It's one of the best written games I've ever played. A gorgeous, colourful presentation to it, an outstanding characterization that some of the members of the team here massively outdo their MCU counterparts. It's devastating that we won't get a sequel due to this game's financial performance and all the Embracer Group shenanigans, but this game really is brilliant. There was this scene towards the end of the game that was completely optional, by the way, where Drax and Peter are talking about families over this balcony. And it really resonated with me, like the emotional depths of it, it hit me massively, man. And it was an optional scene, and I just remember that scene cemented just how strongly I feel about this game's writing and characterization, and the big moments that happen. It was beautiful. It's got a lot of care to it too. From the alternate costume showing where they debuted, with proper comic accreditation, the amount of comic book references and Easter eggs, plus the soundtrack, of course, is wonderful. Doing the team huddles and having to say the right things for a combat boost while some 80s jam is playing, surprisingly, never got old. Sure, I'd have liked to have played as more than just Quill and played as the other Guardian members, and combat didn't provide the best feedback, but it was serviceable. But the narrative, environments, soundtrack, and the writing made me never really think about those low points. A terrific video game. Into the top 4, and at number 4, I'm going with Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales. When we first got that PS5 showcase to showcase all of the launch titles, and Miles popped on screen, I don't think any of us saw a Miles Morales spin-off coming from Insomniac Games. First of all, I want more of these games, by the way. Lower price point, shorter runtime, a more refined experience more often. Where this game does exceptionally well is in its setting. I think Miles Morales, out of all 3 franchise entries so far, has the most memorable setting of the snowy New York City with its bright Christmas decorations. It provided this weird sense of community in a video game because of how you interacted with all of the characters within it. Miles Morales feels like a comic book issue, and that's a great thing. I think why I rank this the lowest out of the 3 Spider-Man games is that Spider-Man 2018 tells a better story, and 2 has the most refined gameplay. Still, I really like this game. The playfulness of the traversal of Miles, the enhanced combat kit with his Venom powers, the introduction of the neighborhood app for the more refined side stories. Even though I said that 2018's story is better, I really do like what they do here with Finn and the introduction of Roxxon. The remix of Miles' theme to the original score is so unique, and the scene of Miles designing his suit for the first time gets me so excited every time. And how they managed to make Miles feel distinct, even with something as iconic as Into the Spider-Verse dropping around it, shows how good of a Miles story this was. Spider-Man Miles Morales has got a lot of heart to it, and with it being a reasonable length, it always begs for a Christmas playthrough. Great video game, man. Down to the final 3. At number 3, I'm going with Marvel's Midnight Suns. A game of 2 halves really. One half that is weird and wonky, and the other half that is simply sensational. Midnight Sun's decision to make you create a character to interact and build relationships with your favourite heroes was divisive to many players. There's parts I enjoyed, hearing Yuri Lowenthal talk about his Spider-Man battles over the years, Avengers talk about their past. It was fun to get to know the background of some of your favourite heroes. But also yes, some of it was extremely cringy. But that other half that I spoke about, when you get to play into these superhero fantasies of these characters, boy does it sing. I'll be honest, I was like, oh man, card-based gameplay? Only to be proven completely wrong. Midnight Sun's card combat was so clever, so well tuned, and really delivered that superhero power fantasy in a way that you'd usually relegate to a third-person action-adventure. Bringing in a crowd control hero like Spider-Man to take out multiple grunts, but then someone who can deal a devastating attack to a boss. And it would really test you and make you think in some scenarios. The environments were so intrinsically designed to be interacted and taken advantage of, and much like Ultimate Alliance, a superb roster here. Many of whom we hadn't really had in games. Ghost Rider, Blade, Magic, Nico. It was a weird comic book cast, but a great one. One that's underappreciated. Even though character relationships could be a little cringy, leveling that up and unlocking movesets was always very rewarding. I will forever be annoyed that we don't get a sequel to this video game because of what this game set up in its post-credit sequence, but it wasn't afraid to get weird. We got Dracula in the DLC, and I know people are getting that for the first time in Marvel Rivals, but of all the characters, Dracula was the main DLC villain, and it was great. And that DLC also added more fantastic characters. I know many people have been put off by the card combat or the Persona-like elements, but I really can't recommend Midnight Suns as a whole more, because there's nothing like it. And when everything clicks on that combat side of things, it's so satisfying to watch those characters translate to a strategy game. Its story was good too, DLC as well. Midnight Suns was the Marvel game that deserved more. The final two then, Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2. At number 2, I'm going with Marvel's Spider-Man 2. A game that is better than the original in so many ways. Faster and more slick traversal, a more detailed and realised New York and Queens, more memorable and resonating side quests, enhanced combat kits, cinematic boss fights, and a storyline that, on paper, should be any fan's dream. I really love Spider-Man 2. I'm disappointed that there was never DLC, because it's such a fantastic sandbox to play around in, to traverse around. Spider-Man 2 is a comfort game for me, whether I'm doing random crimes and teaming up with the other Spider-Man, going for a nice casual swing around New York, or replaying my favourite missions, or simply just chilling in photo mode and creating my own comic book covers. It's an upgrade in nearly every way, but I think as a result in trying to get bigger and better, it lost some, but not all of the heart of the original. I thought the first half of the game was brilliant. The presence that Kraven craves on screen, the build up to the symbiote, exploring Pete's dynamic to Miles compared to Harry, there's so much to appreciate there. But it gets big, without spoiling it, and in doing so, loses a little bit of what made that ending of the first so fantastic. And where it maybe loses the heart in its main story, it more than makes up for in its side content. Howard, the grandpa on the bench, deeply emotional scenes that I mark as trademark Spider-Man scenes, what makes this character a fan favourite. There's a 2-hour stretch in the middle of the game that is just Insomniac firing on all cylinders, narratively, gameplay, and John Pisano just going off. I'm not going to talk spoilers here because I did a whole video on that last year that I'll link in the description if you want more of my thoughts there. I understand people's disappointment in no DLC and that the ending felt quite rushed, but for me, that doesn't take away from how special of an experience this is, that as a kid who grew up on the 90s cartoon show, it feels like an arc of that. And that's why I really love Spider-Man 2. So then, number 1. They always say that the first time is the most memorable, and that definitely applies here with Marvel's Spider-Man 2018. We'd spent E3 after E3 just waiting for this game, and man, it really delivered. That opening sequence is still so brilliantly Spider-Man coded. The messy room, picture memories, rent due, toast, the crime radio, and then bang, you're off swinging to some music, just forgetting about life's problems. It's just a fantastic introduction that, as with all great games, you know you're in for something special. Miles Morales and 2 have evolved the gameplay and sandbox, definitely, but the foundation that was built here was so good. I don't miss the gadget wheel in that it did feel like it could really slow down the pace of combat, but it definitely helps in making this Spider-Man, Insomniac Spider-Man, beyond just the design of him. But I think what put Spider-Man 2018 at the top of my list is how good the main story is here, the emotions of it. The best Spider-Man stories, or the majority of the best Spider-Man stories, come from when Peter and Spider-Man's lives get caught in the same web. Having Martin Lee be the antagonist for the majority of the game, and how that directly impacts May at Feast, and it allows that emotional through line for May and Peter, but then watching this mentorship of Otto and Peter interact throughout the game is what helps 2018's narrative be so strong. I think from minute 1, you know where this is going, but how that story is told and that relationship is built is that it doesn't matter that you knew the destination. The journey was worthwhile. That when you reach that destination, the performance from Yuri Lowenthal is 10 out of 10. It sells Peter, it really sells this Insomniac Peter and Spider-Man. And what makes a good Spider-Man, what defines this character, is the hardest choices that, again, I won't spoil. I know that many people kind of feel the game was open world and checklisty, and yeah, I'd agree with the towers, but for me personally, I loved getting all the backpacks. One thing about the Arkham games they did a phenomenal job with was, in Arkham Asylum alone, you felt like you'd known this Batman for 10 years. Not just because of the story, but the character bios, the dynamics as you interacted throughout the game, but the interview tapes as well. The backpacks here were a great addition to enhance the world building of this Insomniac Spider-Man. I also love the vibrancy of how New York loves here. I think it still stands out from the sequel in a different way. It's just so comic book coded that I know I keep saying, but taking photos of famous Marvel landmarks and getting one-liners, the sheer amount of suit options, both MCU and comic book favourites in the base game and the DLC, it's staggering. For me, Marvel Spider-Man 2018 was the true beginning of the new Marvel games era, and is still the standard setter for it. That's just my list though. I want to hear your ranking, from 10 to 1, or just whatever you've played out of those 10 games. But never mind all of those games, we've got to think about what's on the way too. Wolverine, Rise of Hydra, Iron Man. What are you most excited for out of those? I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the vid, I'd enjoy you leaving a like on the video, and as I said at the top, if comic book games are what you're into, news, reviews, guides, streams, consider subscribing. I'd love for you to stick around. Regardless, all my socials are linked down below. As always, I hope you have a terrific day. Play games, get gains, and I'll catch you in the next one.